Alright, I'm going to work through a few problems here with you real quick. This starts on page 509 in your workbooks, and we're going to look at writing an equation for a line that passes through the points 1, 6, and 3, 24. So if I'm looking at that, I know I have the equation y equals a times b raised to the x power. Okay, so I'm going to plug in 6 in place of my y, and I'm going to keep my a and my b. I don't know what they are. That's what I'm trying to solve for. And I'm going to plug in 1 in place of my x, because that's what x is when y is 6. Okay, so now I'm going to try to get a by itself. So I'm going to divide both sides by b. So now I know that a is equal to 6 over b. So I'm going to take this value and I'm going to substitute it in place of my a. So I have y equals, and instead of a, I have 6 over b times b raised to the x power. Well, I also have this other point here that I can use, this 324. So what I want to do is I want to plug that in place of my x, and I want to plug in the 24 in place of my y. Okay, so we found out that b equals 2, so what I want to do now is rewrite my equation that 24 equals a times 2 raised to the third power. So now what I need to do is simplify and solve for a. Okay, so what is 2 to the third power? 2 to the third power is nothing more than 8, right? So 24 equals a times 8. I want to divide both sides by 8 to get a by itself, and I get 3 is equal to a. So now we have our a and we have our b, so we can write our exponential equation. Y equals a, which is 3, times 2, which is our b, raised to the x power. Now I have an exponential function that if I plug in either one of these points, it will be true. You can test it out. 2 to the first power is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 to the third power is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. So we know that it works. Okay, so in example 2, it says that it wants us to write an exponential function given a graph. So I have the graph here that's in your book at the bottom of page 510, and I filled in my table by looking at the points. -2 crosses at 10, -1 is at 5, 0 is at 2.5, and 1 is at 1.25. So now what we need to do is, using that information, we need to write our equation. So the first thing that I like to zero in on is that 0, 2.5. Knowing that it's 0, 2.5, that gives me the initial value, the starting point. My function started at 2.5. That's the initial value. When x was 0, y was 2.5. So that's my value for a. So we're already halfway there. We just need to know a and b. Just by looking at the graph, we were able to find a. So we can plug it in and use that information to solve for b, and that's what I've done here. So I used the next ordered pair, 1 and 1.25, and I plugged in the 1.25 in place of my y, and I plugged in the 1 in place of my x, and now what I have to do is just solve for b. So in order to do that, I divide both sides by 2.5. Well, looking at that, 1.25 divided by 2.5 is nothing more than a half. A half is the same as 0.5. So I know that b to the first, which is just b, is equal to 0.5. So now we have enough information to write our equation. Y equals a, which is 2.5, times b, which is 0.5, raised to the x power. And there you have it. There is your equation using the information from the graph. So now for example 3, we're going to write an exponential function given a description. So it says a radio station is giving away $1,000 to the first listener who answers a question correctly. If a question goes unanswered for 1 hour, the prize increases by 10% until it is answered correctly. Write a function to describe this situation. So our initial value, once again, is our A. Our initial value is our A. So it's starting the prize at $1,000. Now this is where we have to think about growth or decay. What's happening here? It's growing. The amount is increasing, which means growth, right? It's going to be more if it's increasing by 10%. Well, 10% is just the same as 0.10 if we write it as a decimal. We know that that cannot be our value of B because it has to show growth. And in order for a function to show growth, the B value has to be greater than 1. We talked about that in an earlier video. So in my equation, I have y equals A times B. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm taking 100% of that $1,000 and I'm adding an additional 10%. So we represent 100% by using the number 1. I'm trying to make a period there. Okay. Anyway, 100% of this original value, so that's where that 1 came from, plus an additional 10% raised to the x power. Well, they're not using y and x, they're using p and h because x represents the number of hours and y represents the prize money. So they said p is equal to 1,000. We'll go ahead and add that together. That's just 1.1 raised to the x power. So the correct answer is D. Okay, moving along. Oh, that's all that I was going to do for this video, and then I will pick up with the second part of section 9-3.